Now we are going to shift from fantasy literature and mythopoeia and the like to a much more realistic field.
Extreme.
Yes, when I first met Dr. Maja Daniel, she told me that she does everything and anything as long as it's realistic, realistic novel. But of course, we as humans breathe myth wherever we are. So, sorry, what was that? Okay. So we are now just going to explore the use and genesis of myths in a different genre. And this is going to be about Polwesterns. And I'm really curious because I don't think I've ever seen one. So let me just very briefly introduce you to my colleague and member of the ReWest Research Group, who's also been great assistance organizing this event. So Dr. Daniel, she earned her PhD here at University of the Basque Country. She also previously, she holds a degree in both Spanish and English philology. And her research is focusing mostly on naturalism, regionalism, and eco-criticism in the works, specifically in the works of Annie Proulx, but not exclusively. And she has published several chapters, different edited volumes, collective volumes, and is now working, or actually she's going to tell us about a new book that she is just about to publish. Okay, so thank you, and the floor is yours.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Maya, for this really nice introduction. Well, I'm very happy I've been given this opportunity, well, to share my findings, my research on, well, quite an unusual topic, not the commonest one, academically speaking, yet, well, truly interesting, sometimes surprising, and, well, definitely enjoyable, I believe. And so I hope you'll enjoy my lecture, my paper, this presentation that I've entitled Vodka versus Whiskey, Drinking in Polwesterns and its Cultural Connotations. Wait, doesn't work. Yeah. No? No. All right, so let's start with these two pictures. What is that they show, and more importantly, what is that they convey? Well, obviously, what we see here, according to many scholars, one of the most recognizable scenes of any Western, a duel. It seems that this image encompasses the genre's chief elements. It shows archetypal characters, the cold, fearless gunslingers, society's indifference towards death, and Western's acceptance of such masculine problem solving. Also, this kind of scenes makes us recall the internationally recognizable iconography of the American West. The wide-brimmed hats, cowboy boots, sheriff's badges, and the six-shooters, wanted posters, and, well, the typical landscape, in this case, Monument Valley. Yet, there's one essential component lacking: the alcohol, namely whiskey. For, well, drinking is ubiquitous in American Westerns. It's hard to imagine even a single non-drinking cowboy, even a single movie involving teetotal characters, even a single film without saloon settings. Interestingly, the presence of inebriated characters is not limited to the original American Westerns. In European movies labeled Westerns, alcohol is just as pervasive as it is in those from the other side of the Atlantic. The aims of this lecture, by the way, lecture based on my chapter published in this collection, Kindred Spirits, it was published just a few months ago, is, well, on the one hand, the aim is on the one hand to ponder the seemingly unavoidable connection between alcohol and the genre, and on the other to analyze sociocultural aspects of drinking observed in the Polish post-war Westerns. Now, regarding the contents, I'll briefly explain the origins of the genre. Then I'll move to what links this lecture with the conference's main topic, the myth of the West in this case, plus I'll mention some other modern American myths. After that, I'll talk about the context and the political message of the Polish Westerns, and eventually, I'll comment on the drunkenness in the Polish People's Republic. The acronym is in Polish is PRL, and I'll be using it from now on. And Drinkingin Polwesterns. I hope I'll have enough time to play some scenes from the movies in question, for I believe this is the best way for you to understand my point, what I'm talking about. Now, with regards to the origins, one possible approach to an examination of the genre is the historical one, and the understanding of Westerns as a completion of the previous century's growing enthusiasm for the imaginary West. Certainly, if we look back through history, it was over the last 5 decades of the 19th century when the myths of open land, freedom, and individuality were first embraced by urban industrial America. Dime novels proved extremely successful. They developed as a distinctive genre and showed some very consistent elements. Most of such elements coincide with the formulas already established by James Fenimore Cooper's The Pioneers. According to Baker, the stock plot has been and still is the story of lawlessness threatening to upset life in a primitive frontier community. Set against the Western landscape as romantic backdrop, it involves plenty of action, gunplay, and a love story, sentimental in commercial Western. The stock of characters following a sharp division between heroes, or a lone hero in general, and villains have been and still are the staples of the popular Western, just as the moral issues of frontier violence have been and still are distinctive features of the serious hardback. Yet, some other scholars, such as Joe and Conrad, claim that such a historical compression is inadequate for understanding the phenomenal rise of the Western film in the period from roughly 1946 to 62. She argues that not only is the Western not consistent across time, with thematic, geographic, gender, and political issues varying with contemporary discourses, but more importantly, the narrative aspect of the film is only one of a complex set of signifying practices that audiences experience. Now, despite these difficulties in defining the Western genre and a certain disagreement as to its origins, there is nevertheless broad agreement that the foundations of the genre indicate that it is far from static and, ever evolving. Perhaps the three criteria in which Cavalti reads the Western, formula, genre, and myth, are truly crucial to understand it and to reveal its essence. Now, Yorgos specifies them as follows. The formula is a popular and consistent pattern, single elements such as setting, character, wardrobe, etc., seen in a given film, while the genre is the body of text that this formula creates, the end result after combining these elements. The myths are generally cultural and political, and rarely spiritual. Now, these cultural and political myths come down to the greatest myth of all, the myth of the West, which shaped American culture and created the Western paradigm. In fact, American national identity is intimately bound to the mythologized history of the frontier, that boundary between civilization and savagery, and evokes such fundamental notions as, well, chosen people, manifest destiny, and promised land. In Conrad's words, the myth of the West is the story of westward European American expansion into an open wilderness, full of literal and figurative resources through which the body politic could renew, replenish, and re-energize. Thus, Westerns, particularly in the so-called golden age of the genre in America, from about 1946 to 1962, did not only provide amusement for their audience and gain huge profits for the powerful Hollywood studios, but also will convey a very important political message. In the United States, the post-World War II period was the era of great political, cultural, and social changes. And as a result, well, Westerns were used to somehow justify aggressive American foreign policy, by the way, sometimes termed cowboy policy, by presenting it as morally correct and as a natural continuum of the nation's expansion. Now, when recalling the rise of the United States as a superpower during the Cold War, one should also recall the Soviet bloc, the other global force. Obviously, the social, cultural, and above all political contexts in which the Soviet Union and its European satellite states, such as Poland in those times, moved were diametrically different. However, there too, Westerns were written and filmed, both in order to entertain viewers and at the same time turn the youth away from ideologically antagonistic Hollywood classics, and to adapt American multimedia methods to indoctrinate the Soviet viewers with communist propaganda. In Poland, too, national Westerns emerged in the post-World War II period. Sometimes, similarly to the Soviet ones, they were labeled as Easterns, sometimes Polwesterns, or simply, well, Polish Westerns. Unlike East German Indianer film or the Hungarian Gulasch Westerns, Polish Westerns did not feature stock Western characters such as cowboys, Native Americans, or sheriffs, but instead focused primarily on American Western narrative conventions, employed Western-like music, and featured the new Polish frontiers, namely the so-called regained lands, or Western. Now I'll show you a map, and so you can see what I'm talking about. Regained lands, Western Poland, the Bieszczady Mountains, and the Masurian district. After World War II, Poland's borders were redrawn following the decisions made at the Potsdam Conference. Some of the eastern Polish territories were permanently annexed by the Soviet Union. The ones, marked with, gray. And then, in turn, the territories of pre-war Germany and Free City of Danzig, the pink ones, became part of Poland. They are known as recovered territories, regained lands, or Western borderlands. And here, with this red circle, is marked the territory of Bieszczady Mountains. It's important to underline that, as Haltow points out, given the film's political implications, the protagonists of this new Polish cinematic Wild West were not just fighting with some criminal elements, but the enemies of the new system. Hence, their heroism was perceived as even greater, as they fought the global enemy of the whole nation. Now, turning to myths again, in the pre-war period, the national historical myth of the Wild East was widespread in Poland. The idealized image entailed courageous Poles fighting against the barbarians, such as Cossacks, Turks, and Tatars. And after the war, the Ukrainian insurgent army. However, because of the post-war reorientation of Poland's geopolitical situation, the myth of the recovered territories also took hold of the Polish mind. Some of the films shot in the People's Republic of Poland, PRL, mostly in the 1960s and 1970s, share numerous features with American Westerns. The presence of alcohol, although never highlighted, seems to be one of the necessary characteristics of these Polish iterations, just as it is of classic Westerns, where elements related to drinking are, in Danny Wedding's words, staple features. Now, in my analysis, I turned out of these traits, in international Westerns would seem to be, an especially complex and appealing project for here two sources of influence merged, two sources of influence. On the one hand, the Western formula, namely the customary presence of whiskey and inebriated characters as a part of the formulaic plot, and, culturally conveyed implications of alcohol consumption. Now, to talk about drinking in Poland nowadays is certainly not the same as to talk about, the same activity over previous centuries. But above all, it's notably distinct from alcohol ingestion in the PRL. While today, the Polish culture of drinking resembles European drinking habits, that is, a wide range of alcoholic products is consumed and, more importantly, enjoyed and savored, it is also recognized that Poles are still struggling with their 20th century and especially PRL era heritage. Krzysztof Kosiński, in his 2008 book, which title could be translated as History of Drunkenness in the Times of PRL, introduces the topic of alcohol consumption with concise but meaningful facts. Poles in the PRL period became one of the heaviest drinking nations in the world. At the end of the 70s, there were about 5 million people abusing alcohol, out of which around 900,000 chronically. Several thousand people, mostly men, were getting drunk every day, a part of them at work. An average Pole was spending on alcohol 1 month's salary per year. Daily, over 800 people were ending up in drunk tanks. Day after day, about 350 traffic accidents caused by inebriated drivers or pedestrians were being registered. Alcohol drinking turned into universal drunkenness. Now, in my research, Danny Wedding's alcoholism in the Western genre serves as a fundamental reference concerning elements related to drinking in Westerns. His examination of the cinematic portrayal of alcohol use and drunkenness in the genre provides an influential characterization of this recurring motif in numerous Hollywood productions. Some of these patterns, such as the intersection of the negative portrayal of alcohol abuse with Native Americans, misuse, seem to be exclusively American, and thus depictions of Polish drinking are more, egalitarian in this sense. As for the kinds of beverages consumed, clear cultural differences can be appreciated. In terms of the roles identified by Wedding, namely town drunks, good-natured drunks, drunken gunslingers and ex-gunfighters seem to have their equivalents in Polish varieties. Additionally, the conflation of drinking with masculinity and a mockery of teetotalers might be another common point, although what Westerns show is that drinking is not exclusively a male privilege. The films chosen for this analysis were produced in the socialist period between 1958 and 1977, and almost all of them are set immediately after the end of the war in 1945. Here they are. Now, since I do not want to exceed time limits, I'll skip the synopses and I'll move to the core, to the gist, since it's not really necessary to understand my point. But well, let's have a look at just briefly at again at the films in question. Rancho, Texas is the first one, released in 1958, directed by Vladimir Berestovsky and screenplay by Józef Hen. Then Wilcze Echa, or Wolf's Echoes, from 1968, directed by Aleksander Ścibor-Rylski, and it's an adaptation of Jan Gerhardt's Łuny w Bieszczadach novel. Then Wszyscy i Nikt, or All and None, from 1977, directed by Konrad Nałęcki, screenplay Janusz Przymanowski. And well, from 1964, Prawo i Pięść, or The Law and the Fist, directed by Jerzy Hoffman and Edward Skórzewski, based on Józef Hen's novel Toast. And finally, Południk Zero, or Prime Meridian in English, from 1970, directed by Waldemar Podgórski. To have a full picture of alcohol drinking in Polish, in Polwesterns, the examination by categories, such as what and how is being drunk, and consequences of drinking observed in different groups of characters, seems the most coherent approach. Hence, we might logically begin by looking at the very beverage being consumed, and thus highlight the crucial difference here from the Hollywood productions, for in the Polish equivalents, whiskey, well, is visibly lacking. In these Easterns, apart from the Law and the Fist, which is somehow special, vodka is the only spirit. Although sometimes the viewer cannot be completely sure, given that bimber, or Polish moonshine, containing at least 60% alcohol, was in many cases the cheapest choice in the post-war period. In fact, during the war, bimber was indeed the most common beverage, often even used as currency. Nonetheless, once World War II ended, a new government installed by the Red Army established the Polish spirit monopoly. And as a consequence, the illicit production of alcohol could lead to imprisonment. Hence, in terms of considering the propagandistic goals of the PRL cinema, one may assume that vodka is the beverage of choice in Polwestern films. In addition, vodka was readily available in the PRL as the state monopoly took care of maintaining a constant supply, while largely disregarding food shortages. This relevance of vodka, consumed in diverse situations and for different reasons, is clearly reflected by the films in question. The characters drink it in a single gulp. Interestingly enough, drinking is nearly always accompanied by food, sometimes plenty of it, with several main dishes included, and at other times simply by a zagrycha, which translates as snack or side dish. This is something very Polish. Those who consumed alcohol partook of fatty food to coat the stomach and ensure its strength, which as a result prevented rapid intoxication during long events. As for zagrycha, the side dish, it had to taste strong, since the main reason for consuming it was to neutralize the burning taste of vodka. Some of these side dishes are seen in Rancho, Texas, the first film I've mentioned, as the protagonist orders a shot of vodka and something that looks like roasted chicken thighs, while at the same time the waitress brings the order of half a liter of vodka and jellied pig feet. The tavern also offers such snacks as sausages, blood pudding, canapes, and pickled or fermented cucumbers. And I'd like to play this scene for you so you can see it with your own eyes, okay? A little village in Bieszczady Mountains.
Panie szefie, czego? Daj pan to. Się robi.
One of the two main characters who somehow wants to be a cowboy, a real American cowboy, and well, something that, well,
Szefie, pół litra proszę i nóżki.
Proszę.
in the Hollywood westerns would be a saloon, right?
Zdrówko.
All right. Well, similarly, pickled cucumbers are served to the main character in Wolf's Ecos. The scene is especially noteworthy here, for it depicts the convergence, somehow absurd in this case, of Western-like and Polish drinking customs. In the harsh setting of an austere military point in the Bieszczady Mountains, the villain and hero raise a glass of vodka in one hand and a pickled cucumber at the end of a fork in the other. This is the eventual representation that the Polwestern toast acquires across multiple storylines. Have a look. This is the screenshot. All right, the villain with his pickled cucumber and, well, drinking something that looks like vodka, or, well, maybe it's the moonshine, right? Now, having now identified the drink in question, both the manner of consumption and any possible consequences of drinking will be commented on. It is especially pertinent to explore attitudes toward alcohol displayed by different groups in the movies. The first group is men, significantly divided into two subgroups, villains and heroes. However, before turning to differences, common features will be highlighted, and what unites all male characters in all Westerns is their understanding of masculinity, their unconscious longing to represent the dominant masculinity, this dominant masculinity, which consists of those elements of males that a society views as most important to being male, which work in relationship to elements society views as being antithetical to maleness. In America, the definition of dominant maleness seems to involve values of, according to West, values of achievement, aggression, toughness, and hardness. Moreover, American culture has linked being a man with alcohol use. The aforementioned toughness is not only physical, but also means being able to hold your liquor or drink vast quantities, binge drinking, without serious social consequences. Studies suggest that the general belief, not only in America, especially among boys and young men, is that to drink is to be masculine, and to drink heavily is to be even more masculine. Now, in post-war Poland, this manly image of men was not an exception. The widely held opinion was that a real man has to drink. Now, bearing in mind the former, a notable relation developed between drinking and the Western genre in Poland. Male characters in the Polish Westerns were expected to drink in order to stay in line with the genre's narrative formula, and at the same time, given the setting of socialist Poland, characters were socially and culturally determined to drink in the film's context. The most illustrative example of Western Polish male drinking is reflected in The Low and the Fist film. There are 7 men taking part in an unexpected party in an opulent hotel in the middle of a desolate town. The 2 villains drink incessantly, but they are not drunk, only more aggressive. But overall, their control over the situation is grounded and calm. The hero drinks just as much as his adversaries, but he remains cool and clear-headed. Another 2 men, neither good nor completely evil, consume spirits in average amounts, their drinking being unremarkable. The only person ending up completely intoxicated is a simple peasant who previously joined the band of looters to become rich and now deals with remorse due to his recent religiousness. Good moral values win out, but he pays for it with life, killed by the merciless criminals. He symbolizes weakness, not only through his moral hesitancy, but precisely by the fact that he cannot drink like a man, by his state of excessive inebriation. And well, I do have this a scene where this weak, inebriated peasant can be seen, but since this very scene encompasses more issues, more characters, more behaviors, I'd rather play it in just a few minutes. Now, oddly enough, a male character who is in some ways parallel to the role model of the good-natured drunk appears in this film as well. Maître de Hotel, Schaffer. He was found dead drunk, the only person remaining in the town. He was inebriated and he remained so throughout the whole movie, alternating sleeping and drinking. Nevertheless, although he seems harmless, he turns out to be not entirely good-natured, for his loyalty to the new authority, the commander of the criminals, brings harm to the protagonist. Schaffer's representation as a malevolent character may reflect historical and diplomatic tensions, as the Polish post-war film industry rarely portrayed Germans, like Schaffer, in a positive light. Germany was collectively considered a national enemy and a source of evil. And I've got this scene right here, so I'll have a look. Dead drunk, found like this, in this abandoned town.
Pijane Bydler. Te, auch! Öffne die Augen! Siehst du uns?
Verfluchte Sonne, verfluchter Schlaf.
Wir sind Polen.
Guten Tag, meine Herrschaften. Ich bin Herr Schäfer. Maître d'Hotel im Tivoli, Restaurationssaal. Ich bitte mein Aufsehen zu entschuldigen.
Also du hast in der Funkstation amtiert.
Das ist möglich.
Rąbniemy go?
Should we kill him?
Zrobi pan to?
Miasto było puste i powinno zostać puste.
Zaprowadź go do hotelu.
Steh auf.
Steh auf!
Nach Hotel.
All right, that's it. Now, this lack of trust towards non-drinking males together with the image of unmanliness, can be interpreted as one of the reasons why Swatfina, the hero of Wolf's Ecos, tries to conceal his abstinence. First, when invited for a drink by the headman of the thieves, the scene with the cucumber, his excuse is that he detested pickled cucumbers as side dish. The second, when the village's tavern's owner offers him a shot of vodka, Swatfina simply holds the glass in his hand, but never actually raises it. Now, in case of Prime Meridian, the theme of male drinking is exceptional, for the outcome of the banquet is unexpected. To begin, all men drink heavily, but the consequences for each of them are different. The village leader takes a particular interest in filling everyone's glass with vodka repeatedly. He drinks too, but stays rather sober, even at the end of the party. The protagonist's accomplices, as well as the marauders, get visibly inebriated. They dance with women, shoot in the air, and finally fall asleep on the table. What makes the film noteworthy in terms of its alcohol-related aspects is that it is the hero who ends up intoxicated. The viewer notices the lieutenant, Bartkowiak, the hero, mumbling, and his pronunciation is somehow fuzzy, and his eyes misty, the dull look of a drunken man. However, there now comes a moment when he realizes it is time to stop, and as a result orders everyone to stop. Enough vodka, he screams. Afterwards, although still stumbling over his words, he explains the dignified purpose of his mission, his patriotic plan of turning the Germanized Masurians into loyal Poles, through which he recovers the image of a true hero. And here it is.
A tu coś mam ekstra.
Just a few seconds.
Daj wam spokój.
Zostanie
The
dla
villain
pana.
offers the hero
Powiedz mi pan, co byście dla tych
more
ludzi zrobili?
alcohol.
Stoi jakaś piekarnia, sklep.
Panie pełnomocniku, niech pan sobie nimi głowy nie
The
zawraca.
villain looks completely sober.
Jak nasi głodowali, to oni pływali w masełku. Trzeba się teraz odkuć. Prawda?
A mnie nie rozumie, panie Szczygiel.
The hero is visibly drunk,
Mnie tu
but
przysłali,
still,
żeby... No, jakieś normalne życie.
his words are noble,
Żeby ci ludzie, co tu
patriotic.
tyle lat czekali na tę Polskę,
He's a true hero
mogli...
again.
Rozumie mnie pan?
All right. Now, the issue of female drinking and its representation in the Polish Westerns is also thought-provoking. As Wolska points out, in the course of history, rules governing wine used synonymously with alcohol, wine drinking, were different for men and women, and they changed in different times and places. In the PRL, the perception of female drinking was somehow complicated. On the one hand, unconsciously following the judgments of previous generations, as in many other European cultures, drinking women were viewed as being of loose morals, bad wives, and mothers. On the other hand, since the socialist planners were encouraging women to emancipate, which in fact meant to engage in underpaid work, many of them joined men in the proletarian drinking style. Although traditionally wine, sweet liquors, or beer were still considered female drinks, it also became common for women to drink vodka. According to sociological data from 1963, in several bistros examined, 1 in 3 women consumed a quarter of a liter of vodka in one go. Out of 5 Polish Westerns, The Low and the Fist is the only one which includes women as secondary characters on an almost equal footing with the males, at least in the central part of the plot. There are 4 such women, and they represent 4 dissimilar attitudes. All except Anna, who promptly becomes the protagonist's most trusted companion, are presented to the viewer while taking part in a party, while drinking. They are encouraged to consume alcohol, for the men's goal is to have fun. These women are survivors of the war and concentration camps. By participating in drinking, they are somehow exposed to the men's sexual urges, as they too want to enjoy themselves without turning to prostitution. Oddly enough, 3 out of 4 are shown as strong and self-determined, unlike most of females who are typically represented as passive in the Western genre. Anna, although constantly with a glass in her hand, stays sober and goes to bed alone. The leader, the eldest of them, seems to have extensive experience of partying. She not only drinks, plays the piano, she sings, but also leaves the banquet alone, disappointed by the strange attitudes of the men there. The third woman has decided to enjoy herself and concludes the night by seducing the hero. The case of the fourth woman is the saddest, but probably the most expected in the situation where alcohol and wicked men abound. This beautiful and fragile girl has the misfortune to be chosen by the most violent of the bandits as his evening companion. Although at first she seems delighted and just tipsy enough to have a good time, the villain later forces her to overdrink to sexually abuse her. The viewer watches as she is taken upstairs against her will, and later, after the rape, ignored while sobbing in a ragged dress. And this is the party question. This is the villain, one of these most violent ones, and the girl who's gonna be raped. Here we've got the hero and Anna, the companion. Here, this is the weak, drunken man, the maître.
Złoty i cóż mi rzekł on złoty, gdy kitki krew stęsknoty, a w ziemi złota dość. Wino, tym winem rzeki płyną, jak dzieci piją wino, od wina tylko śpi. A my gin!
The leader of the villains.
Niech spali przejara, niech płonie czarci syn.
Gin, będziemy pić morderczy gin, ja Dlaczego się śmiejesz?
Do pana.
Aha.
Jest jedyna, którą
Look at the
kocham najwięcej.
All right.
Dla
Drinking
niej wszystko poświęcę.
all the time.
Wszystkie noce i dni.
Ja umiem kochać prawdziwie, żarliwie i tkliwie. Ja umiem kochać na
The hero.
Ja umiem kochać po cichu.
Ani jednego czystego kieliszka. Dobra?
And what I want to show you here, this is the
Czas, niech
The
szczęście błyśnie. Chwytać szczęście,
drunk peasant.
kochać, żyć na jawie śnić. Ten sen
Cicho. Mam interes.
Co takiego?
No, to dużo.
And well, here, what I want to show you is, look, the scene of the rape.
nie będę piła nigdy, nie.
Well, the rape, just before the rape.
Napijesz się ze mną?
Mogę się napić. Pamiętam twoje oczy dziś,
Jak ci na imię?
z rozkoszy nie.
Wiem, Hanka. Od rana już na ciebie patrzę.
Tak jakby to...
All right. Such examples of sin involving female drinking, or more precisely, females and alcohol, seem to illustrate certain dissimilarities between classic and Polish westerns. First, as Wedding points out, women in Hollywood productions are usually unable to drink, and thus to get drunk. Apparently, in the West, drinking whiskey is clearly a prerogative of men. Yet in Polish movies, drinking turns out to be far more egalitarian, more inclusive. Everybody consumes alcohol, probably reflecting Poland's socialist society, and women generally, well, handle it well. Secondly, considering the classic whore-angel dichotomy and additionally the hero's moral imperative to defend the weak, women understood as such, the example of the Low and the Fist provides a rather disturbing image. One possible interpretation of these puzzling scenes, non-prostitutes in search of fun and the collective disregard for the girl who's raped, is that in the immediate post-war era, previous moral principles might seem a luxury soldiers and concentration camp survivors could not afford. Now, according to McIntosh, movies are often viewed as both a reflection of social attitudes and a shaper of them. For their study, Alcohol in the Movies, Characteristics of drinkers and non-drinkers in films from 1940 to 1989, they reviewed 100 popular films released between 1940 and 89. Westerns representing 4% of these. They rated the characters on a variety of attributes and compared the ratings of drinkers and non-drinkers. Their findings were that drinkers tend to be portrayed as having a higher socioeconomic status and as being more attractive, more romantically, sexually active, and more aggressive than non-drinkers. In addition, drinkers are considered to be romantic, heroic, and more aggressive without being less good than non-drinkers, suggesting an individual who does not initiate violence, but who does not shy away from a fight. The authors observe that aggression, far from being negative, is a positive characteristic in Hollywood movies and provide, well, James Bond as an example of this phenomenon. To conclude, it seems that, the issue of alcohol consumption in Westerns is influenced by the genre's key characteristics and by the message concerning the very concept of masculinity that it entails. A certain unstated agreement in terms of expectations is established between the filmmaker and the viewer. Yet, the reception of international iterations, given the audience's particular cultural background, proves unarguably more complex. It seems that the only plausible way in which non-Hollywood Westerns can succeed and be regarded as quality examples of the seventh art is to adjust such product traits to their national contexts. By enabling viewers to encounter parallels to their social realities, a valued picture is constructed, one that merits their reflection, even if the subject of such contemplation is something as prosaic as drinking. Thank you so much. These are the works I've cited.
Well, that was quite the education on Polwesterns. I have so many questions, but maybe I should let you ask first. Okay, so we have a first question there.
I really have to ask this question because I'm a chain smoker. And I was thinking, because when I saw these films, when the Polish characters are drinking, they're also always smoking, most of the time.
Yeah.
I was thinking about Westerns. My husband would divorce me right now because he loves Westerns, but I always remember the characters in Westerns drinking, but I never remember them smoking. It's when I think of the Western, is it just
my
me?
next research has just begun.
No, but is it just me that
Spaghetti Western.
Well, Clint
Eastwood has that, in his mouth, but that spaghetti Western.
He always has the cigarette in his mouth.
But what about the classic Western, the American, not the spaghetti one, because I remember Clint Eastwood with that thing in his mouth. But what about those in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, John Wayne? I cannot remember John Wayne.
John Wayne smoking?
It's a good question. I don't remember.
I'm not
now
really
I have
sure.
to go back and receive all the Westerns.
Yeah. Definitely. Thank you. This is, definitely. something I have to add to, my analysis of
that's my
eating,
Polishness.
drinking,
Polishness.
and now smoking. This is...
Because Polishness is about drinking and smoking together.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, great point.
And of course, from home, you can just type your question in the chat box, or you can just raise your hand.
I would say that a real cowboy smokes. Think about Marlboro's commercial. This is the essence of the West, the American West, of this figure of a cowboy. So I'd say that this is something apart from the alcohol, which is somehow compulsory, right? I'd say that cigarettes are also there. Yeah. Definitely. But now that I'm thinking about it, I think they do. They drink and they smoke. They must. I mean, come on, Marlboro. Come on, this is for real men. Real men drinks and smokes. So, yeah.
But somehow drinking became more iconic.
Yeah, definitely. Saloons, but saloons are full of smoke. So, I mean, they had to smoke a lot in all these saloons.
More questions or comments? Because I have one.
Yep.
So the first iconic element of the Western formula that you've shown us is the jewel. And I seem to remember in many iconic Western, American Westerns, this repetition of a scene, is repeated scene in which the villain and the hero, or the hero and the villains in the plural, engage in this kind of drinking duel. Let's see who's the last man standing in a saloon, in the same way that a duel, it's last man standing. And I was connecting this with the idea of death wish and drinking and masculinity. So of course it stands to reason, I mean, I cannot argue against the point that drinking is one of the ways in which you show that you're a true man. But what about the self-destructiveness of alcohol and the obvious destructiveness of jewels, like literal jewels? This idea of fighting, killing, and self-killing. I don't know, is there any an element of death wish in the act of drinking in Westerns? And then does it translate in any way in Polwesterns, or is it just for partying? I mean, death at the heart of the process of drinking when it's such excessive drinking?
Yeah, thank you, Amaya. Interesting. No, I really don't think this is the... I mean, I can't really connect this wish of, death and their drunkenness. I don't think so. I think it's definitely linked to this masculinity, this image of real men, of being able to do something, of showing that you're better, you're harder, I think they were not even thinking about this relation between alcohol and smoking and death. I mean, and then plus in those times, for instance, smoking was not really considered dangerous for health, and drinking. Especially in Polish culture, drinking was so natural, and people were not thinking about, right, that it may cause health problems, that they can die, and they were dying actually every day. They were dying every day, but I think it was something that they just somehow decided unconsciously to not to see, right?
Like a form of escapism?
Sorry?
A form of escapism?
Yes, escapism. Yeah, well, yeah. No, I think it was not even, a point. It was not even there. This thought of hey, it can be dangerous. Don't do it. You may end up not so well. I think it was not there at all. I remember this Mad Men series. Have you seen it? Mad Men. Yes. Yeah. So they were smoking there all the time, and drinking. And I remember I think it was the first chapter, when somebody said, hey, we've got this report, and they say that smoking may be somehow dangerous or not really, nah, come on, leave it. No, that can't be true. No. Silly. This is silly. No, forget about it. So I think it was not there,
Yes, another question?
Yeah.
Microphone, please. Thank you.
I was thinking about this masculinity thing, but in the Polish context, because we're talking about after the Second World War and the period, the so-called communist period in Poland. Not a death wish, but apart from masculinity, a sign of desperation.
Yeah, desperation, despair, yeah. Despair.
Simply because, particularly you have very positive heroes who can get drunk because they cannot stand the reality that they see. So they're very masculine, so to speak, but also very desperate. Would you agree that desperation is part of it?
Yes, definitely. But this is what definitely. It was there, and this is what somehow made me. It was one of the reasons I decided to to research and to somehow try to find if there's if it was because everybody was drinking, or it was because tough guys have to drink in this genre, and then and at the end my conclusion is that, well, both it merged somehow. These two sources of influence just merged. They drank because they had to, because of the formula, and then they drank because it was just normal. I mean, everybody had to drink. I mean, teetotal men were ridiculous, actually. And that's why that's why I've mentioned the hero who tries to conceal his abstinence, his not drinking. And so he's somehow weak because of this concealing, and then somehow he had to because of the Polish culture. But then I was thinking about Shane. Can you remember Shane? Is probably the only cowboy, the only hero in all these Hollywood westerns who doesn't drink at all. And he was not concealing this fact. He was man enough. But in these Pole westerns, it was impossible. I mean, if you don't drink, you have to somehow try to do as if you were.
Okay, so I think we have to leave it a bit now because we have Owen Barfield's conference. But thank you very much for this most informative and fun lecture.
I hope so.
So thank you.
Thank you.